what? Extra History did a video about the Holy Grail. Oh yeah, we're definitely diving into that one. So I just saw this pop up. Looks like it came out several days ago. The Holy Grail, Faith versus Fiction, Religious History. You guys know that this is right up my alley. That as somebody who's not only a Christian and a pastor, but also a historian, that it's my two worlds colliding when we get to talk about history and religion in one. And I know that's not for everybody, and that's okay. But listen, religion's a huge part of our history. So even if you are not a religious person yourself, it's still history. So I hope you enjoy this. I hope you'll take that for what it's worth. I'm going to put the link down in the description. Extra History is absolutely one of my favorite channels that we take a look at from time to time, using it as our textbook to explore these topics in more depth. Let's go ahead and dive into this one.
Well, if this isn't just the most perfect way to start an episode, I don't know what is. The Gospel of Matthew tells us, "And he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, 'Drink this, all of you. For this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out of many for the forgiveness of sins.'" Now, assuming that we take this passage literally, where is the cup that Jesus used? Is it perhaps this red chalice in Valencia Cathedral?
So, just right off the bat, just a couple of things about this. So, the Gospel of Matthew is written by the Apostle Matthew, who's one of the original 12 disciples. There are a lot more people following Jesus in the Gospels than just these 12, but these 12 are kind of set aside from among the larger group that has been following Jesus at this point. Matthew's a tax collector. Tax collectors are widely hated by the Jewish populace. Remember, the Jews at this point have not been occupied by Rome for very long. It's been, within the lifetime of some people at this point, and they're employing these local tax collectors. And so basically, a guy like Matthew, who is Jewish and is one of the people, the Romans might come to him and say, okay, you've got to collect 5 talents of gold this year from Chris. And then Matthew comes to Chris and says, Chris, you owe the Romans 8 talents of gold this year. Well, I don't know any different, so I give him the 8 because that's what I'm told I owe. Matthew pockets the 3, gives the 5 to Rome that he owes them. And so everybody knows this is going on. And so not only are you working for the enemy, you're working for the occupiers, but you're also getting rich off of your own people. And so to call someone like Matthew as a disciple is a big, big deal. This is one of the ways in which Jesus kind of turns everything on its head. And so this is Matthew, who of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, is one of 2 of those Gospels that is written by one of Jesus' disciples. Now, we think Mark might have been kind of writing Peter's story, but anyway, so that's that. As for these relics, a lot of these relics or pieces of relics are going to come about because of Constantine. So we're talking like in the 4th century AD, Constantine becomes a Christian. He sends his mother Helena to the Holy Land to start finding this stuff. And so she says she finds the true cross, and she finds the tomb, and she finds the tablecloth from the Last Supper and the Holy Grail and all this stuff. And you go to Vienna, I was just there last week, and you see these pieces of these relics. Here's a piece of the true cross. Here is a piece of the tablecloth from the Last Supper. Here is a piece of the burial shroud of Jesus, all this stuff. And there's these relics all over the place. We have no idea where they came from for sure.
Or maybe this dish of green glass in Genoa Cathedral. Ooh, how about this golden gilded chalice in Leon? Or this silver object in New York's Metropolitan Museum? Or perhaps, in the finest Indiana Jones fashion, this simple wooden bowl in Wales? Well, today, we are gonna find out. So join us as we dive into the convoluted history of the Holy Grail, look at all of the candidates, and evaluate them in everybody's favorite cup-based medieval relic game show, Grail or Fail!
That's fantastic. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, one of my all-time favorite movies. Obviously, you have the big scene at the end, which has one of my favorite quotes from an Indiana Jones movie, where you got all these grails, all these cups, they're all gold. And he's like, yeah, that's the cup of a king of kings. And they're like, no, it should be the wooden one. It's a cup of a carpenter. And he drinks from it, and, the wrong one. And it's like he chose poorly, and he dies horribly.
Oh, oh man, this is going to go straight to syndication. Speaking of hilarious game shows,
wait, however, that's what that guy looks like? I don't think I remember ever seeing his face before. That voice doesn't fit that face.
It is brought to you by today's sponsor, Abolish Everything, which I was just on. But you know what? One great game show at a time. Let's go. The Holy Grail. Everybody knows about it. Kinda. Is it a simple cup of a carpenter, perhaps? Or the object of a questing knight?
Or if you watch the, what's the movie, the Dan Brown thing where, no, the Holy Grail was actually Mary Magdalene.
This cup, floating in the sky above the Garden of Gethsemane, or a castle beacon for a convent of nuns who really want to be punished.
I was not expecting a Monty Python reference, but I guess I should have. It's been 50 years since Monty Python and the Holy Grail was released. And yes, let me go back and face a little of the peril. I bet you're gay. You know, it's a really good scene.
Or even this glass architectural element at the Louvre, which a certain bestseller says is apparently over the grave of Mary Magdalene in a plot by a Chinese-American architect to hint that she had Jesus's kids. Though, side note, that book does fail to mention that a cathedral in France actually does claim to have Mary Magdalene's skull in this reliquary, which is way, way, way more metal and interesting. Seriously, if the book ended on this golden nightmare fuel,
I definitely need to get to that church next time I'm in France.
Would have been way cooler. It's like if an Elden Ring boss had a baby with Returnal, but I digress. Back to the question at hand. Which one of these has the best claim to being the real Grail? Well, that is a surprisingly complicated question.
Of course it is.
Looking at all of the candidates can teach us a lot about the history of Christian relics, the evolution of culture, and how legends and reality feed off each other.
That's actually a great way to approach this because, number one, there's no way we can possibly know these relics in most cases. I mean, some relics, obviously, we can know with a certain degree of confidence that they came from, say, 5th century saint, things like that. Many of these we don't. We can go back close. Like I said, we can get back to Helena with some of this stuff, which is 300 years after Christ. But what happened between her and when these events took place, we'll never know. It's a degree of faith.
First off, though, we do have to deal with one big semantical myth. None of these are the Holy Grail. That is because Grail isn't really a term the Catholic Church uses for relics.
The chalice?
Every one of these existing relics are officially referred to as the, quote, Holy Chalice. Later on in this episode, we will circle back to how the word Grail came about, but it does say a lot about
a Grail? Oh, sorry, I had to go back to Monty Python.
Power of storytelling that everyone knows this object as the Holy Grail, even though the claimed real objects aren't referred to that way.
Interesting.
The first historical mention of the chalice actually comes from the Bible, with the book of Matthew talking about how Jesus blessed bread and wine at the Last Supper and shared the cup with his disciples in the first sacrament of communion.
So the Last Supper is the celebration of Passover, which goes back to the Old Testament, goes back to the events of Exodus, where you have, there's this elaborate ceremony that takes place, and the events where they paint the blood of a lamb on the door, and this allows then for the angel of death to pass over those homes when the death of the firstborn happens in Egypt, and so God institutes after that in Exodus that they are to remember it every year by celebrating the Passover feast. And so the disciples and Jesus are in the upper room celebrating the Passover feast, and he is always showing them ways in which he is a fulfillment of the Old Testament. And so now he takes Passover, which was, the blood of the lamb protecting people from the wrath of God. And so now Jesus is going to become the blood of the new covenant, the blood of the lamb, the perfect sacrifice being offered for the sin of the world so that God's wrath would not be poured out on mankind for his sin. So it's a direct connection between the two events.
And that's kind of it. The cup isn't described as having any special powers or significance.
Right.
In fact, it says a lot that we've built a huge storytelling tradition around the Holy Grail,
Indeed.
But none of the other dinnerware. I mean, where's the love for the Holy Plate, am I right? Why didn't any Arthurian knights go questing for a sacred wine decanter or blessed tablecloth? Well, actually, come to think of it, they kind of did. Granted, the quester wasn't a knight of the Round Table. Rather, it was the queen mother of the Byzantine
Helena.
Empire. Saint Helena, mother of the Emperor Constantine and devoted Christian, went to Jerusalem around the years 326 through 328 CE when she was in her late 70s. While this trip was probably largely political, she also collected stories about where various Bible events occurred, founded or renovated churches on those sites.
And so a lot of what we know about where things are, for example, the site of the crucifixion, goes back to this trip that she made. In the aftermath of the sacking of Jerusalem in 70 AD by Titus, a lot of this stuff gets destroyed. And so the site, for example, where the crucifixion took place, the site where the tomb was believed to have been, it gets covered over by this massive temple that is placed there by the Romans. And so the site, for example, of Jesus' tomb is gone. It was destroyed by that temple. We know where it is, but the tomb's not there anymore. There's some people say there's a garden tomb that they think is it. But when Helena goes, she is shown to this site where this temple had been built over top of it. And so they placed the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which we know with a fair degree of certainty is the site of the tomb.
And supposedly acquired a large number of relics. These supposedly included the true cross, the nails and rope from the crucifixion.
Because somebody just kept this stuff around for 300 years, right?
And the holy tunic. Now, granted, it is kind of easy to clown on Helena, because after all, it is entirely possible that the people in Palestine heard a rich Roman woman was wandering around offering good money for rusty nails. So yeah, probably some of what she acquired were fakes. But let's look at it another way.
Right.
By asking where historical events during Jesus' life took place, even 3 centuries after his execution, she was doing much of the same as early historians like Herodotus. Because that was just sort of the best many historians could do back then.
Right. I mean, look at the time frame between events that Herodotus is writing about, or a guy like Manetho, who wrote about a lot of early Egyptian history. They're writing sometimes thousands of years separated from events. And yeah, sometimes they have access to records that are older than that. But 300 years from the events of Jesus to the time that she's writing, that she's reporting on this stuff and that she's gathering this stuff is not an absurd amount of time.
To ask local people for stories passed down about locations. And since some records indicate she ordered excavations of sites, supposedly that is how she found the true cross, some historians have dubbed her a pioneer of archaeology.
Yeah, and there's no reason that we can't think that maybe early Christians did preserve some of this stuff. There's just no way to prove it.
Actually, come to think of it, St. Helena probably deserves her own episode sometime in the future. Zoe, write that down. I know the list is getting long. We're going to get to it. But here's something that she wasn't said to have found. The cup from the Last Supper. However, someone must have found the chalice, or at least a cup claimed to be the chalice, since in the 7th century, an Italian pilgrim wrote about making a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. And among the objects he claimed to see was an onyx cup venerated as the one Jesus used in the First Communion.
Onyx, interesting. So it's fascinating to read some of these early reports that we have from people about events. You read, for example, Josephus, who's writing a few decades after Jesus. And he, for example, writes about how pilgrims will come and go up to see the site of Noah's Ark. And he just accepts as a fact that Noah's Ark not only existed, but they know where it is and people go see it. So we have some of those kinds of things, which is really fascinating to me.
But it is important to note that at this time, no one really cared all that much about the Holy Chalice.
Wasn't a big deal.
During the Middle Ages, the Big Daddy relic was the true cross. In fact, pieces of the true cross were so popular as relics that it's long been joked that if you put all of the pieces together, it would build a whole forest.
Yeah.
Which is to say, since the trade in relics during the Middle Ages was such a booming industry, if the Holy Chalice was in fact a big deal, there would have been a lot of them associated with stories of miracles and healing, and there just wasn't. Some records do suggest there was a chalice venerated at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, but it ranked as a relic roughly equal to the sponge Jesus was said to have been offered a drink from. But then, everything changed.
Yeah, so Jesus says something about being thirsty on the cross. They dip a sponge in vinegar and they put it up to his lips.
Changed. And by everything, we mean culture. You see, in much of the Middle Ages, stories were told through art. Most people were illiterate, and that meant that mural paintings, stained glass, statues,
Right.
and oral folktales could be as influential as sermons and books when it came to shaping religious traditions and stories.
Right, when you can't read or write, you love a good comic book, and these are medieval comic books. These paintings and this imagery is everything.
And many artistic depictions of Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane pictured a literal cup and communion wafer or surrounded by holy light. Now that cup was metaphorical, referring to Jesus begging God to let this cup be taken away from me. In other words, please don't make me have to die for humanity's sins. It's been suggested that these pictures of cups may have been misinterpreted in folk traditions, but a rival hypothesis suggests that pre-existing tales of magical cauldrons in Celtic mythology either fused with accounts of a holy chalice or otherwise influenced where the tale would go next.
I mean, maybe. I mean, there's so many ways in which it could have come about.
And look, if that all sounds like a fancy way of saying, we don't really know, yeah, we don't really know. And probably never will. But what everyone agrees on is that the patient zero for Grail legends is Chrétien de Troyes, a 12th century troubadour from what is now northern France. Chrétien largely wrote Arthurian stories, and one of his most notable achievements was writing one of the earliest stories with Lancelot as its main character. Though it was his last verse poem, Percival, the Story of the Grail, which would be his most popular. In it, the questing knight Percival meets the Fisher King, a wounded monarch who cannot walk far or ride. That night, Percival watches a mysterious procession of objects, ending with a beautiful maiden carrying a grail.
And this is why, for example, the Indiana Jones story has its roots in that time period with the Grail, because that's when it was very widely famous.
French for a dish or bowl containing a single communion wafer. Percival stays silent, but wakes the next morning being told that if he had asked the right question, it would have healed the king and his court. This story was a sensation, despite the fact that Chrétien died before completing it. In fact, that kind of made it more popular, because later troubadours could essentially fan-fiction their own ending. And
this is such a great look at how history or how legend develops. I mean, think about how many people believe certain things about historic events because it took place in a movie. How often have we talked about how Admiral Yamamoto in Japan said, I believe all we've done is awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve. Where did that come from? The movie Tora Tora Tora. That's how that got popularized, because it's shown in there. There's no evidence he ever said anything. He probably believed it. He probably said something like that later on, but he never said it. Popularized by a movie, and now a lot of people think it's true.
And oh boy, fanfic they did. The next several decades saw 4 major continuations of the story, plus 2 prologues and a sequel. But it was the work of Robert de Boron, whose stories were inspired by Percival, but not a direct continuation, that the Holy Grail really entered the lexicon. While in the original story, the significance of the Grail is ambiguous, de Boron wrote a complicated backstory where Joseph of Arimathea, the rich man who donated a tomb to bury Jesus, used the cup.
And he's not only a rich man, he's also a member of the ruling council of the Sanhedrin. He's an important religious and political figure in Jerusalem at this time.
From the Last Supper to collect Christ's blood after the crucifixion. In it, the Grail demonstrates mystic powers and is brought to Europe in the company of a line of Grail keepers, and then it was off to the races. There were stories about Percival questing for the Grail, but also Galahad, Lancelot, and others.
I love that he described this as fan fiction, because that's totally what happened. You have an original story writing about events 1,200 years after they would have taken place, and now you have everybody else basing their stories off of that story.
The assorted knights. These stories all became massively popular and, surprise, surprise, suddenly relics of the Holy Chalice, previously an also-ran relic, mind you, were popping up all over Europe. And they continued doing so for centuries, even into the modern era. Though there are only a few that are considered true candidates today, which is just a great pivot to talk more about our contestants in history's favorite cup-based medieval relic game show, Grail or Fail?
They're all fail, we don't know.
Okay, all right. First up, we have the Valencia Chalice. Ooh, very nice Valencia. Let's take a look at your qualifications here. It says in your bio that your base and handle are a later make with Arabic inscriptions, all right? But your red agate bowl dates back from around the 1st century CE or perhaps 2 centuries before. Looks like there's also vellum records tracking you at least back to the 12th century. Okay. And would you look at that? Apparently not 1, but 2 popes have celebrated mass with you and referred to you as genuine. Okay. We have a strong opening contender. Except, hold on 1 second. I'm sorry. I just had this thought that, like, if someone was furnishing an upper room for a dinner, are they really going to provide a red agate cup? Like, I feel like in a world where people sort of steal hotel towels and stuff, that might be a risk.
Judas.
I mean, I guess if you are literally giving it to Jesus, it would be cool. But look, I'm not trying to yuck your yum. Strong start.
Why? Why do you have to throw what is Walpole, or was it Walpole, up in the corner and just put that in my face in the middle of this video? All right, anyway, sorry.
The gate. Next up, we have the Nantios Cup, which, oh man, to quote my favorite Chicago-based antiquities expert, that is the cup of a carpenter. But it says here you're actually
Welsh?
from Wales. Okay, and you do have some
Still,
miracles.
I know it's a recent flag. It dates to the 20th century, but is there a better flag anywhere on Earth than the Welsh flag? Oh my gosh, it's incredible.
Attributed to you, but originally you said you were to be made of the true cross. So, like, which is it? Were you part of the Last Supper or the crucifixion? You don't know. Well, okay, you know what? I love the confidence anyway. The Nantios Cup, everybody! Going down the line, next up is another Italian candidate, the Genoa Chalice. Ooh, very nice. Say, are you emerald? Oh no, it says here Egyptian glass. And it seems that not until the late 13th century that anyone identified you as the Grail. That's not a big deal. I mean, before that, your miracles were just said to have happened because emeralds are magic, even though that's not what you're made from. Oh, but you were seized by Napoleon, so that is very cool. All right, everybody put your hands together for this beautiful chalice, easily the most dazzling. Up next is a hometown hero, right in my own backyard at New York's Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Antioch Chalice.
Well, it's in America, so it must be the one.
Hailed as the Holy Chalice after its archaeological discovery in 1910. And that's it. Huh. Oh, wait, no.
We found a cup 100 years ago in Antioch. It must be the Holy Grail.
Out here, experts also all agree that you are in fact a lamp. No, not the holy lamp, just like an oil lamp. But you know what? What a lamp you are. Give it up for the Antioch Challah Lamp! The Antioch
Challah
Lamp! Seriously, how did this one get on the show? Get me a producer on the line right now because this is becoming ridiculous. And last but not least, we have the Chalice of Donna Urraca! Wow, look at the finery. Feels like if a Nazi drank from you,
I was going to say, that looks like the one that Donovan drinks from when he chose poorly.
Would just shrivel right off his face. But that, I guess, is what happened with the false Grail, right? I don't know. It says here you weren't considered a candidate until a 2014 book claimed it, an idea that a professor at...
Listen, how many times are we going to go through the fact that somebody presents new evidence, new item, new relic, and it comes back to a book that they wrote, right? You know, for example, dealing with Jack the Ripper, and the women weren't actually prostitutes. Well, how do we think that? Well, somebody wrote a book and said they weren't prostitutes, and they sold that book. Or the shawl is proved it's Kosminski. He was the killer all along. Why? Because somebody wrote a book that said that that was the case.
Oxford labeled, I quote here, idiotic. But hey, a lot of people came to see you as a result, and you even got modeled into VR, so that is
a lot of books
truly
too.
Something. So there you have them, ladies and gentlemen. Big hand for all of our contestants, please. But sadly, you can't all be the holiest of holy.
I mean, one's the only one that even has any remote possibility, and that's still really, really remote.
Liquid vessels. So we have to ask all of you in the comments section, Grail or fail?
None of them are the Grail.
Now, due to my ability to peer into the future, I have the results right here in this envelope, so let's just see here. You all fail. None of you are the Holy Grail, because again, remember, it does not exist. It is a literary invention. But as for who the real Holy Chalice is, drum roll, please. You all are! No, seriously, this is not a participation trophy kind of thing. Because, to be honest, the historicity of each of you is not that important. Even the Vatican has stated, when it comes to relics, the belief in them and the devotion shown to them is the spiritually important part. Even if what you are praying over is not really a piece of the true cross, it's a representation of the true cross and holds the same spiritual weight. In fact, that's often how Buddhist relics work as well. There's just not the same scramble to authenticate them because outside of stories, that's not really the important part. What is valuable is their tool as a focus for faith. Even if the relic is false, the feelings, the devotion, the good works and spiritual depth they inspire is true. And in looking at this, what I want you all to think about isn't which of these are true or false, but rather how culture, art, belief, and yes, even sweet action-adventure movies have changed and shaped our perception of these objects and what they mean.
Fantastic way to look at this. This is one of my favorite videos they've done because I think they've taken the history and mixed in all of that other stuff beautifully to show us how our perceptions of events and objects and history is colored by culture and writing and art and all of these things.
Seriously, you may have never thought about the Holy Chalice until 10 minutes ago, but I would wager a large sum of money that the idea of the Holy Grail has been bouncing around your mind for ages like it has mine.
Yep.
But the Holy Grail was never real. It's an invention of the Middle Ages, yet it has impacted all of us. So truly, out of our lineup, which is the Holy Grail? Take your pick. Just not you, Antioch. You're still a lamp. Oh God, I have to go fire someone. Oh, extras.
All right, that was really good. I enjoyed that. I thought they did a fantastic job with what could have been a very controversial subject and covered it really well. So let me know your thoughts. Use the comment section below. We'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.